Occupational therapy.
Oh, that's nice.
Hello. How is everyone? Welcome. I am Elizabeth Bergman, the chair of the Gerontology department here at Ithaca College, and I'm really excited to welcome you all to this event, both those of you who are here with us in person and those of you who are joining us through Zoom, which we think is working. We hope is working. Tonight, we are being invited to think critically about the way that we die and, more importantly, the way that we live. And we're invited to do that with our speaker today, Kimberly C. Paul. Kimberly Paul chose to leave her dream job and career in television and film. I expect we might hear a little bit about that tonight, to discover the authentic stories at the bedside of the dying. Working for hospice was supposed to be a temp gig until she could build relationships in the film community in the Wilmington, North Carolina area. But this temporary job spread out over 17 years as the vice president of communications and outreach for the Lower Cape Fear Hospice in Wilmington, North Carolina. It never crossed her mind that her true calling would find her and lead to unexpected and bold intentions to become one of the leaders in the death positive movement happening in the United States today. Kimberly has written extensively about her experiences in life and in working with hospice in her book, Bridging the Gap, Life Lessons from the Dying, a book that students in the End of Life Issues class with me have been reading and will engage with Kimberly Paul tomorrow morning around. She also produces a podcast, Death by Design, that hosts industry leaders in medicine, as well as the arts, designers, caregivers, and authors who are reclaiming their voice around their own experiences with death and dying. In recent years, she has traveled extensively throughout the continental United States on her Live Well, Die Well tour. Unfortunately, that tour was cut short by COVID with only 4 or 5 states left to visit. We're thrilled to be hosting her today for her first set of in-person speaking engagements since the beginning of the pandemic and the Gerontology Department and Institute's first series of speaking engagements since the beginning of the pandemic. So we're thrilled about that. I look forward to hearing what she has to say, and I know that you do too. One quick housekeeping item before we get started. For those of you who are joining us by Zoom, you will be receiving an email from us in the very near future with a form attached asking you to complete the form and send it back to us. Just want to put in a plug for please doing that and returning it back to us, as that allows us to continue to retain the grant funding that allows us to bring programs like this to you free of charge. So with that, I will pass the mic to Kimberly Paul. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you for inviting me to in person. I've missed people really badly, as some of you have felt the same. The good thing is that I am a complete introvert, so I didn't miss you all that much. But I believe there's one thing that we were born to do, and that's connect with other human beings. And as we've all felt over COVID, connection was disconnected. And it's really great to be here today. I'm going to do a little bit of multitasking. I got my notes here. I've got the slideshow for you guys on Zoom as well as in person. So I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my experience and how I arrived in my whole thought process of what's important and what matters most and how I got there. And of course, like anyone's life, it's never a straight line. I wanted to write for television. I worked for Saturday Night Live and CBS Network, and went down to Wilmington, North Carolina to work on a small show called Dawson's Creek, and ended up losing someone close to me, 30 years old. He had melanoma and radically imploded my life, which started this journey of really what matters most. And my love for telling a story and sharing stories really falls in the line of working with the dying, because it was the most authentic stories I've ever imagined. So instead of writing them, I'm now telling them. And the reason I wrote the book, Virginia Gap, is I thought some of these stories were so powerful, they shouldn't die with me. And what it feels like to be a platform to share these stories that they have been gone for decades now, some of the stories that are in my book. And it's really nice for students to hear their stories and to share their stories and hopefully radically change how you live. So I am a creative. I am not black and white. I'm not a nurse. I'll never be a nurse. I love to see outside the box. And I believe that's what I bring to this very taboo black and white conversation. Just so you know, we all are going to die. And the most important question I don't want you to ask on your deathbed is, have I lived? And so I think about my mortality every day. And the more I think about it, the more boldly I live. And the more boldly things that are in that gray area that are important come to the forefront. And so I create a life around what matters most. And get this, as an introvert, it's very hard to tell you, it's all about people. So just to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do, and give me a minute while I figure this out. No. Is this even on? No? My tech guy will come help us. Oh, hey, ta-da. So this is just a little quick overview, but I got a lot of questions earlier today because I wasn't talking about the tour. The tour ended. I was supposed to drive to 49 states, go state to state, working with people, and people were asking me about the tour, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't finish. It was a failure. But what got me there is what we'll talk about a little bit later. But I thought I would share a little bit about the tour with you guys before we got too far down. See, this is Amelia del Sol. This is a 29-foot RV, and my car with a hitch on the back was about 48 feet. To tell you the truth, I have a really hard time driving. Driving this, I only hit one building in Chicago, and really the whole gutter system, but that's just a whole nother topic and conversation. Do you know what it's like to drive down highways with 37 sponsors around death and dying? I've got people looking at me like, who and what are you doing? Especially when you drive up into these campgrounds and they're cracking a brewski, Friday afternoon, and they're thinking, oh my God, what is this woman doing? And suddenly they come over and say, hey, what's going on over here? And I tell them what I'm doing, that I've decided to go state to state to radically change how people live and die. And I have some stories to tell. And what it did when I told my story, it gave permission for other people to tell their stories. And it became a connection beyond anything. We were sitting around campfires, talking about loss and talking about people who meant something for us that they never really cried about and they never really talked about. So Amelia del Sol started the conversation, and the whole process of getting there, but I need to back up because I never wanted to work in hospice, and I want each of you to understand I never wanted to buy an RV and go state to state. A couple of friends of mine had just published a book about his mother-in-law and his mother and my friend's mother-in-law. And she was 90 years old and said no to treatment and decided to come with my friends who lived full-time in an RV and to travel the last year of her life from state to state. And as they were traveling, people heard about her story and started doing really great things. If you've not read the book, Driving Miss Norma, it is about her life and what she experienced saying no to treatment and saying yes to living. Miss Nora died in that RV, and they sold the RV, and they were just happening to pass through Wilmington, North Carolina, and they were now on a boat. And so they pulled up to a marina, and I went out there just to see them. And my book was getting ready to be published, and so we were doing a little photo shoot. And I remember Tim cooking dinner, and he goes, "I have the perfect thing for you. You need to go buy an RV, go state to state, and tell your stories." And I was like, that will never happen. I will never do that. I just knew for a fact I would never do it. And then Remy, his wife, said, we got into another whole conversation, and she goes, "What are you waiting for?" And I was like, well, I'm not a good driver, and I don't want to do this whole RV thing. So we concluded the night. I went to see a college mate in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I walked into her house and I said, "You won't believe what I was just told I should do." And I told her, they think I should buy an RV and go state to state. And I said this: "Until God shows me a burning bush, I will never do that." Well, my best friend from college was a smoker. So we go on the front porch, and she lights her cigarette, and her neighbor is out in the front yard burning a bush. And I remember Sally's reaction. She's just like, "Guess you're going on tour." And I was like, well, because I'm a researcher, I have to investigate. So I go over to the neighbor who's never met me, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He goes, "I'm burning a bush." And I'm like, that's exactly, I know, but why now? Why this moment? What's going on? And he said, he looked at me like, you really want to hear this? I'm like, "Yep, tell me." And he says, "My wife does this little honey-do list for me. The World Series is about to come on. And she told me that I had not finished my honey-do list because I wanted to get rid of the azalea bush out in the front yard, and I had not done it. She was complaining, I want to see the World Series, so I thought the best way was to get the lighter fluid from the garage, spray this azalea bush, and light one match and watch it burn." And I told him, I said, "Well, I'm not sure why you chose to do it right now, but you just changed my life." And he goes, "I don't even know you." I'm like, exactly. And I told him about what I had just said, and he too looked at me and he goes, "Well, good luck." Within 2 weeks, I had bought an RV. And because I don't want to test God. There's something about that, when you make it that bold of a statement, I don't want to challenge that. So I said, okay, maybe it's going to happen. So I ended up buying an RV, rented out my house, and started to create a plan when I was walking my German Shepherd, Haven, in a park. And I get this random phone call, and it says, "Hey, I'm Roberta from Cabot Cheese." I'm like, okay. First of all, it was from Vermont. I don't even think people should live in Vermont because of snow. I'm not a big snow person. So I was like, okay, how are you? And she goes, "I heard about your tour." What? Okay. And she goes, "Cabot Cheese is really well known, and we think we want to sponsor your tour." I was like, "Who are you?" You got my full attention now. She goes, "I'm with Cabot Cheese, and we want to sponsor your tour." And I said, "Lady, I will take your money. First of all, I like cheese. But what does cheese have to do with living and dying?" And she said this: "Cabot Cheese is owned by a co-op of farmers, and we teach our children about life and death every day on the farm. We thought we could help." And I said, "Yes, you can." She was the main sponsor, or Cabot was the main sponsor that opened the door for 36 other sponsors that put me on the road and paid for my gas and paid for me to give free talks like this throughout the United States. Like you heard, my goal is to drive to 49 states. I made it to 46, and this little thing called COVID stopped all of us in our tracks. I'm sad about it. Amelia is not part of my family anymore. She has a new family, but she was really good to me. And I'll tell you a little bit more about in a few minutes why a couple of times when she wasn't. With all good adventures, you need a sidekick. Haven just turned 10 years old, and I need to clarify what a sidekick is. Because you can tell by the look on her face that she is in full understanding that I am her sidekick. I drive, I do all the hard work, and she sees the country. So Haven was just instrumental in really connecting with people. We had talks on stage, and she would be right up there with me. And to the fact that I had a little whistle for her. And I can't believe she's not here today because this is the first presentation that I have done without her, but she is at the spa and enjoying every minute of it. But she sends you her love. So this is what it looked like when COVID hit. The stickers represent the states that I've had even a small book signing or a presentation in. And it started off with only starting in Ohio. It's really just strange to look at this. I haven't looked at it in a very long time. And my hope is that I will finish this tour once I get settled. I'm homeless now. Spent the last year consulting with a couple of hospices in Denver, Colorado. Found out it snowed there. And now my stuff is still there, but I'm now on the East Coast, waxing my surfboard. So I want to tell you a story about what this means. I was coming out of Florida, and Amelia, the RV, lost all power. No power. On a 2-lane road. Actually, it was a 4-lane road called something like I-95, if you guys have heard of that. Yeah. So I make it across the traffic and pull over. It's a very big RV with carrying a car to cross with no power and glide right into the side of 95. And so I'm like, oh my God, this is a brand new RV. This is why I didn't want to do the tour, all of that. And then I said, wait a minute, let me call someone. And I got a hold of a tow truck driver that would tow it to Ford to get looked at. And so what do you do on the side of I-95 when you have your home and your dog? So what I did is I just put the generator on, which had just enough power to last. And I was Young and the Restless and made coffee. And I get this big knock on the door, and I open it up, and there's this probably 250-pound guy in full-blown tears. And I was like, you all right? He goes, yes. I said, are you the tow truck driver? He goes, yes. I'm like, did you break down? Because that's why I'm gonna be crying if you tell me you're broken down. He goes, no, I just lost my grandmother. And some of the logos on the side of the RV, I guess, brought back some things, and I just, it was overwhelming that I think this is the first time he really sobbed. So I invited him into the RV and gave him a cup of coffee. And that's when I learned how his grandmother became his mother and raised him. So really, he lost his mother. And he told me this story, and I'm like, holy cow, this is why I'm doing this sort of thing, to give voice to people that don't know how to voice it until it just falls out. So I unhooked my car and I followed him to the Ford dealership, and while I'm watching him haul Amelia, an RV behind his huge tow truck, I'm thinking, it's about stories. And I need to take his story with me. And so he was running toward me and I was running toward him, and we got to the Ford dealership. I said, I have an idea. He goes, how many books do you have? I want to buy them. And I said, well, first, I have a Sharpie. I want you to climb the back of my RV and write your mother's name on the top. And he did. And I was that started this whole movement of people climbing the back of the RV. And I had over 1,200 names on the top of that RV by the time I finished. So I'm driving in Vermont and I give out my phone number to anybody and everybody who wants it. So he had it, and I get this text. I'm driving across Vermont, and he said, hey, what state are you in? Tow truck driver. And I realized what was the most important thing is maybe by merely telling my story, it gives permission for people to share their story. I think the power of storytelling and the connection, because I still keep in touch with Ray, who's still a tow truck driver in Florida. I don't know why the RV quit, but maybe it was something beyond, something miraculous to bring Ray and I together to create voice. And a lot of people ask me, like, you didn't have a friend come with you? It's just you and the dog. And I'm like, yes. People are like, have you ever gotten lonely? I said, well, I'm an introvert. You can believe that or not, but I am. And I would light a candle and go up on that roof and just look at really, truly how I was never alone on that tour. A lot of people came together, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, for sure. But no one wants to talk about death and dying until they hear your story and that you're vulnerable and authentic and present. I wanted to share with you the first day I arrived at hospice. It's probably one of the most tattooed images in my mind, because I know still today we are struggling with this word death, this word that really is only a moment of our life. And so if you really think about it, I'm not teaching you about death, and nor was I ever taught about dying. I was really taught about how to live. And the stories that people told me really made me live in the present and to live boldly and take many, many risks. My father still like, that advanced care planning stuff is crap. You're now in Fiji swimming with sharks. And, you always call me and say, well, if anything happens with me, this is what's going to happen. And he's like, this is weird. This is really weird to be talking about this. But when you know what's going to happen, you live more freely. You're a risk taker. And even this introvert has taken risks. So I come off of a set of a television company. They hired me, and I said, okay, what I need to do. And they said, hey, you're going to be paired with a chaplain, and you're going to go see one of our patients. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I was like, I am going to get like keys to how to live better at this bedside. This woman knows she's dying. She's going to bestow on me some gems, some really things that I'm going to soak it up like a sponge, right? So the chaplain comes to me and says, hey, you're riding along with me, come along. And so in the car, he continues to be like, look, basically, don't say anything. Just shadow me. Just go with my flow. And just don't really acknowledge, but just be present and observe. I'm like, I can do that. Do it all day long. I'm good with that. So when we get to the patient's house, I'm so excited to meet someone who's dying, right? I mean, I'm a little overly excited, I feel, but still, I was like, be present in my mind, gearing myself up. And so we walk across the yard, and before I even could blink, the screen door comes flying open at the front of the house, and like 6, 7 people come flocking out onto the grass, the front yard. I'm like, whoa, people are excited about death. Yes, and just some of the things in the language in my head. was so different than what occurred. These individuals said, look, and there was like a matriarch of one of them. I think it was the oldest sibling. Because it was all, they acknowledged that they were brothers and sisters and we were here to see their mother. And the oldest one was like, look, we've got something to tell you. Please do not tell our mother she is dying. Don't do it. It's uncomfortable. She's living good. Do not tell her. And of course, Jim, the chaplain, he's like, hey, we're just here to have a conversation. We won't bring that up. After about a few minutes, they let us in. And I remember going halfway up the steps and hearing this New York accent, like, hey, who's there? Come on up. And so we sort of run up the steps and we enter this room and she goes, are you guys the hospice people? I'm like, yeah. And she goes, well, come over and sit down. And there were 2 chairs beside her bed. And she asked me, could close the door. So I closed the door. She goes, I have something to tell you guys. I'm like, okay. And she goes, but you're gonna have to lean in a little closer. I'm like, we scooted on a little bit closer and we scooted on. And she said this, do not tell my children that I am dying. They're not gonna be able to handle it. And I walked out of that house thinking, what have I gotten myself into? The children know it. The patient knows it, but they're not talking about it. When I left over 5 years ago, it was still the same thing. Have we made some impact? Yes. But no one really wants to plan, communicate, or even talk about death. But these baby boomers are happening right now. And I had one come up to me recently and said, look, I want to talk about death and dying all the time with my children. It's my children. They told me, Mom, I can't handle it. And they shut me down. And I said, well, what did you do with your children when they didn't behave when they were younger? She goes, well, back in the day, we switched them. I'm like, you might want to start that practice again, because this is vital to the communication of how, and if you're going to get them to be a part of this, they can stop it, completely. And so it's really important that we find a way creatively to share what you want. So just to tell you a little bit about, the government spends so much money on research. They even did a research about, and with evidence-based research, that everyone in this room will die one day. The 2 things, spent thousands and millions of dollars on it, by the way. The 2 things that is in our control is how and where. Now, there are a lot of things and tragic accidents that happen, but who has a driver's license in this room? So you've already started talking about advanced care planning because some of you have chosen to be donors. And that is key, that some of us, and I really highly say this, it's like when you are 18 or 19, you're not living with your parents anymore, you've got to have these conversations. So Wilmington has UNC Wilmington. It's part of the Chapel Hill. I've heard they were in the Final Four. I'm a Duke fan. I don't know about Carolina all that much, but UNC has these smaller universities, and one of the freshmen was a surfer, and he was going to Wilmington because he was a surfer. About a week after he arrived at Wilmington, surf was up. It was a beautiful day, and for you guys that don't live near an ocean, especially on the East Coast, sometimes it can be a beautiful day and a thundercloud come up and a bolt of lightning out of the blue can strike. He was surfing, it was blue skies, one cloud, and it killed him. And his mother and the community rallied around this mom. But she said this, I just wish I knew what he wanted. Did he want to be buried or did he want to be cremated? These are the conversations that we can teach our parents if they're not having them, to say, look, I want this, because tragedy happens every day, especially in a world with a pandemic that we're struggling, still trying to get over. So really, some of what I want to do today is really do some paradigm shifts and through storytelling, show you that no one wants to talk about death, even the providers. But if we claim 50% of our responsibility in engaging about our health and our destination, the providers engage in what they feel they need to contribute, which is truth and reading. I was with a group earlier today, and physicians learn about 35,000 different words. It's a whole nother language. So when you walk in and your doctor speaks Italian, are you going to understand them? No. Med speak is a language they learn in medical school. And so we have to really ask the physician to spell it out. But by doing that is that we ask questions. And so some of that point of view is really looking at both sides and then claiming the responsibility of our own. So basically, you've got the patient and family, and then you've got the medical community. And then the patient and family too, they have their own dynamics in there. But you have the medical community as well. And there's a major gap in our communication, even between family and patients. And then there's also this medical community that is providing the care that we are not communicating with. Both are important and are both responsible in asking the right questions, but also giving the truth. And for some of you who read my book, you guys know that I was never told the truth about someone that I loved until it was too late. So I'm a truth seeker, and I don't feel like the truth can harbor anything of a decision, because if I have all the truth, then I'm able to make the best decision for me, even if it's hard. Even if it's hard. So I wanted to show you, because one of the main goals is to first connect to you as human beings, but how can I radically change how you live? And I believe I want to show you how, and show you in to the point that those who talk about end of life and do advanced care planning versus those who don't. And that's also providing that medical point of view as well. So this is an example of what it looks like without advanced care planning. Does everybody know what advanced care planning is? Advanced care planning is the process, right? The talking about what we want. What is advanced directives? Believe me, I had a hard time with it too. Process versus paperwork to back on that process and what I've decided. So advanced care planning is the process to get to filling out the advanced directives and making someone pretty much the most important document you will ever have. It's a healthcare power of attorney, not a power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney. So when you're unable to speak, they're able to talk. And if you were ever, and each one of you will be a healthcare power of attorney, one for a friend or loved ones, you must remember that you don't speak for that individual, you speak as them. So there are really no decisions to be made, because guess what? You've had this really in-depth conversation and you know where they stand. So all you're doing is representing what they want. There's no decision-making for you. And that's why that conversation is so important. But let's look at this. Without advanced care planning, this is what families think. It's hard to let go. They're in a state of shock. I guess I could turn around and see it a little bit bigger, right? They're unaware of their actions and decisions, and they prolong suffering, right? If most individuals who are elderly with a chronic illness, if they do not have advanced care planning, most likely end up where? Hospital, most likely ICU. They become emotionally driven decisions. How many of you have ever made an emotionally driven decision? Didn't go too well, right? Like it's off the rails. I mean, even dating, like, you know, I'm making an emotional decision about this person. It never ends well. Believe me, my father says I have some characteristics of that as well. But emotional, it's not driven by logic. And so when families do not talk about this and they wind up in the ICU, guess what they want mama to do? To wake up. I have seen more physicians go around the corner and cry, saying, I am prolonging death and suffering. So I think one thing I want us to all walk away is we all play a role, and it's vital that we do our role. Don't know what they don't know until it's way too late. Here's another little gem. The way each of you will die, each one of you, is the way your family most likely will grieve. And damn it, I want to do it well. I want to do it well and lean into something that's coming and never have, we're all going to have regrets, but no regrets that I've not said anything. That's why I always tell my mom and dad, even on the phone, hey, I love you. You're annoying, but I love you. Because you know what? Their annoyingness that drives me completely insane. Guess when they're gone, what I'm going to miss? Them annoying me about things that are out of their control. But it's those idiosyncrasies that are just annoy you, but it's those things are what we miss. So next time you're dating someone or your parents are doing something, think if they were gone. Suddenly you're like, and you crack a smile and you're so grateful that they're in front of you, annoying the crap out of you. It does that shift. So the medical community, if they don't talk with their patients and have conversations, this is their viewpoint, they feel like death is a failure, even though it's a guarantee. Medical community not doing anything is often overlooked as an option. We can do this, we can do that. Rarely do you ever hear there's nothing more we can do. Because even in those moments, you've got death doulas, palliative care, hospice. There's always something to do. They're trained to heal and make better, and they're really unaware of the patient's choices. And so I work with a lot of universities with medical, pre-med, and medical schools. And they're like, we're trying to train our people to talk differently about end of life. But guess what? These young kids get into the boxes called hospitals, and they've had physicians practicing for 30 years. Guess what? The pressure is high. And so they conform. I think I would. I've talked to physicians. They're mean sometimes. And they make me say things like, woo, yes, just let me get out of this room. Yes, I'll do whatever you want. So without advanced care planning, it becomes a blame game. It becomes a blame game. It's frantic. The doctor never told me. The doctor assumes the family is not ready to give up. And when families don't agree, the patient, family, and physician, they all suffer. And that to me is how can we even lessen 1 minute of suffering? How do we do that? But communication. And then following up with communication, with documentation, with further communication, and also know this. If you do it, advanced care planning, and fill out the directives, every year you need to revisit it because it might change. Some of you might have children one day. It will change. So just because you do it once doesn't mean it's a done deal. It can change at any given moment. But let's look at what it looks like with advanced care planning and advanced directives completed. If we do it right, and there's a lot of communication, not just, oh, by the way, I don't want this when I'm dead or in the hospital, and here's some forms. How can we create some storytelling, some humor around it? I use a lot of humor because humor, I feel, makes room when there is no room. And humor can really bring out really what's most important. For instance, I'm filling out my advanced directives before I go on tour. I have my sister, my brother, my parents, my best friend all around listening to what I want. And I said, okay, if I do end up in a hospital wreck because in the RV and I can't speak, who's interested in being my healthcare power of attorney? My sister. I'm like, why? Remember that time I liked this boy in high school and you dated him? And I'm like, that's not a good reason. That is not a good reason to be my healthcare power of attorney and pull the plug on me. But it made room for humor. And it made room for me to know you were not the right person for me, by any means. So what does the family go through if advanced care planning is talked about? It lessens the burden. You know, there's a story about my grandmother who told me, hey, if something happens to me and I die alone in the hospital, I'm okay with that. Just in a brief conversation. And she died in the hospital alone. I did not feel guilty about that because I heard her say that she was okay with that. The rest of my family, I had to say, look, she said this. And the relief it took from them that they were not there at the bedside. I can't express what that meant to them, what it meant to me to hear her voice. Lessens the guilt. There's a lot of individuals that with not having advanced care planning that arrive at the hospital, mom can't talk, she has no power of attorney, and people are like, what does she want? And they live with the decision wasn't the right one for the rest of their life. You don't want to do that to people you love. There's no guessing about care. And it's always those family members, like for instance, there's a lot of families that have that one sibling that lives in California and all the other siblings are taking care of mom and dad and mom gets sick and that person from California flies in and says, woo, hey, we're not doing this. You have to talk to everyone who can stop because guess what a doctor does when people and family don't agree? Everything stops. And again, it's prolonging that suffering. And what you're really doing is prolonging the wishes that someone has expressed. And that's why if you have a rebel in your family that's a little bit on the edge, talk to them. Talk to them because they can stop this process. They have no decisions already been made. And if you have these conversations with your grandmother or your parents and something does happen, I promise you, you will not regret it. And if something happens to any one of you in here and you've had those conversations, there is something about this peaceful, I heard her say this, she's okay. Medical community, they stop guessing and they now are your warrior in a disease management system that equals this healthcare system that we live in. They're aware of your choices. So when they see you in the hospital, if you go to the hospital, they're going to be behind the scenes saying, I know what my patients want and they can fight for you. In a system that sometimes patients, families, and caregivers are totally lost in. Comfort care versus aggressive care. Comfort care is just as aggressive sometimes as if you're taking treatment because it's really harder. As Jessica Zeter wrote a book called Extreme Measures. She's a palliative care physician in Oakland and an ER doctor. And I said, why did you name your book Extreme Measures? And she said, because I had to go against everything I learned in medical school to be at the bedside of the dying. And I was like, whoa, that's a physician, trained physician saying this. But get this, also it doesn't change the outcome. We are going to die. How we die, we can own that. So I call this, like, if advanced care planning is done, there's the human impulse, this aura of the human impulse that causes more calm and peaceful moments. What matters most when time is limited, and I'm going to tell you for a fact, the main lesson I learned, one of the many lessons I learned, it is always about people, people, people. One of the hardest things you'll ever do in your life is showing up for your people, showing up physically, mentally, and spiritually for your people. I'm telling you, it is the most important thing to do is showing up, even if you have no words. I remember my best friend lost her mom, and the next morning she's on the couch. I've never seen her cry. She's crying, and all I could say is, this sucks. This sucks. Because I can't take what she was feeling away, nor do I want to. So really, it's about connection. It's about telling people, I love you. It's about telling people goodbye. And one of the main things that I learned from 9/11 is when those individuals who are in those towers and those planes, and they knew that their life was about to end, what did they do? And I think that's the last fundamental step of living, is finding that closure and saying goodbye and I love you to the people that matter most. And if us in the healthcare field, which I call a disease management field, if we don't tell the truth, we are stealing that last stage away from them. And we as human beings have to reclaim our voice. So what does that mean? It means that we have to have conversations. I'm not sure you should do some things that I've done to my family, like give them my last will and testament for Christmas presents and big boxes, and they want to open it up because it's the biggest present under the tree, along with a picture of me in a casket, acting like I'm dead. That might be a little extreme. But again, we still laugh about it. When I was leaving for the tour, my mom became my healthcare power of attorney. And my best friend, my family was there. And when my mom was walking my best friend out, I was sitting there with my dad, who's my best friend. I love him. And he said, one question, why didn't you pick me? I was like, Dad, here's a scenario. I'm in Wyoming, brain dead on a vent, and I see you. Could you have come and turned the machine off? He goes, no. I'm like, that's exactly why, not you. Because we are too close. There are things like the death deck out there, the conversation project. Also, you know, with the 40/70 AARP, if you are 18 and living outside of your family's home, it is so vital for you to say, Mom, I think it's time for me to fill out my advanced directives. And they're going to be like, what? And this is a perfect opportunity for college students to continue to be rebels and warriors in a field and teach the older generations of how we should approach living. Also, the paperwork. I know that this is the black and whiteness, and I'm going to give you my phone number so we can go. If you're interested, I'm happy to get on a Zoom with you guys and walk through all the paperwork. But just the number one paperwork is healthcare power of attorney. And please, please don't forget to make planning this colorful. Music, Barbra Streisand. I want fresh flowers. I want to go out of this world listening to people laugh about the crazy crap I found myself and put myself in. That's what's important to me. Because I want to hear laughter. So what does that mean? What is the color for you? How are you living? What's important? Color it and let people be a part of it. So really, conversation, paperwork, designing your end of life, one will not work without the other. And it's vital that the conversation and a healthcare power of attorney form is completed like soon. If you don't have it. And just know that 60% say they're making sure their family is not burdened by tough end-of-life decisions, but only 44% of people actually do it. 60% say they want to die at home. Only 40% of people die at home. Why is that? Why is that? And just remember this, that fear does not stop death. It stops life and living. And just know that if we have these conversations, we might not can change when we die, but where and how we die can be in our control. And and dadgummit, I want to do it really well. So sometimes things can't be explained in scientific terms, but only by the human experience. We must embrace both in order to care for patients and families and even ourselves as we age. We as patients must demand this by reclaiming our voice and communicating our wishes to those that matter most. And if that means providers, that means any physician that wants to talk to you. And yes, I've even talked to my eye doctor about it. You just never know what your conversation will give everyone permission to turn around and have conversations with other people and use stories. There's a couple of things that I wanted you to be aware of. Of course, I have a podcast and I have a book out, but really the upcoming project is a project I've been working on for the past year called Why Wait? It's a pod documentary about me spending time with someone who is dying and then pushing me outside of my comfort zone. I jumped out of a plane and a patient, Eric, a good friend of mine, suffered from ALS. He died in December. And he said to me this, would you tell a dying man no? And so I found myself, who was scared to death of heights, jumping out of a plane because he had such joy in that chair dealing with ALS. And so I thought maybe I could have just as much joy jumping out of a plane. So that's coming soon. But I want to leave you with this last lesson that I learned from the dying. And I want you to really take it in because this is so instrumental. That time is not measured by length, it is measured by depth. And on the road, I experienced more individuals facing death that fully were embracing life. And I also met people who had not been diagnosed with a chronic or terminal illness, dying slowly every day. The dying have been my greatest teachers. And I am so proud to be here for the first time in 2 years, sharing their stories with you. And thank you. And all I hope is that you take some of these stories and radically change how you live and die. And maybe their stories can change how we all look at the dying, because they are the greatest teachers I've ever had. Thank you so much. Anybody have any questions?
What was wrong with the car or the van?
You know, thank you. I love these simple questions. You know, the RV came out 2 years before I bought it, and it was a flaw that it just had I guess this little trigger that if it got loosed, it would the engine would lose power. I would have the generator, but they fixed it totally under warranty. And I was like, this is great. I forgot to multitask, guys. This is my contact information if you guys ever would like to have it. What was this?
I think got another question here.
Oh, who?
Did you have your hand up?
I did, but I don't have to ask.
Yeah, please.
Well, I guess I was curious if you have, it's kind of a loaded question. Do you have any advice for someone who may be struggling with their faith in the afterlife, which used to give me comfort, and I've lost that a bit? You know, having a strong belief in some sort of God and an afterlife kind of softens the fear of death. And because of my struggles with my faith throughout time, it's made it a little less comforting. So
That's a great question. And I think as spiritual beings, we're spiritual in some sense. I do think that faith ends up playing a big role in some people's lives. All I would say to that is that I've seen a lot of tragic and trauma around religion. And so sometimes we have to create our own space. And what does that mean for us? A good friend of mine had a lot of religious, I guess it's trauma. And it can happen very easily. We were just talking about this at dinner. about, my faith and what it's like for me to practice. And I had to create something out of the box, and I like a little something here and a little something there and a little something there. And what feels good is what I encourage you to follow. Because I don't think there's one way that fits everyone. And I go to church every day. It's not a church building. This is my church. And this is where I find peace. So I do go to church every day. And what that means for me is meditating and reading and becoming someone that I feel like I'm supposed to be. I do say that recently, just recently, there's been a lot about religious trauma. And to the point that I'm even connecting with a few people to just like, what does that mean? And I would love to give you a card because I think you should be a part of that group. And what does that, yeah, what does that mean? And how can we bring that to the open?
The Catholic religion can do damage if it's, I don't want to say used incorrectly, but you know what I'm saying. There's a lot of things that come along with it.
I think any organized religion has major flaws because they're run by human beings.
That's correct.
And I say this, I struggle in my faith every day because I can always be better. And so I would love to even carry on. And plus I have someone I would love for you to talk to.
I'd love that. And I'll leave you with a quote.
Yeah, please.
That I love how I'll leave you all with a quote.
I love it, please.
So now, I love the quotes. I mentally noted them, but one quote I've lived by, and I'm paraphrasing ironically, is basically when you look at somebody's, it's the idea. When you look at somebody's gravestone, you see the year they were born, and then you see the year they died, and then there's that little hyphen. And someone once told me that hyphen is the most important thing on that headstone because that is how you lived your life. And
Dash.
A dash thing.
And you know what, though, it's a poem. It's a poem, and I say that because you're absolutely right. Birth is a moment and death is a moment. But all that in between.
It's everything.
And you know what? We're all flawed human beings. All of us. So we got to get over it. We're not perfect. No one is. And but I do hear you. And the last 2 weeks we've been talking about religious trauma on end of life and the grief people are suffering from that. So I'd love to hook you up with a couple of my colleagues.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
I actually have kind of a story around that, particularly when you talked about the birth date and the death date. When my mother and father died probably 8 years apart. And when my mother died, they had both said they wanted to be cremated. My brother had the urn with the ashes for years. And he never put the date of her death on the stone, which was very much how my father was about it. And he and I finally called him up and I said, we need to decide to do something. And what we actually ended up doing was sneaking into the field in back of the house that my parents lived in, which was really, really important to my mother being there, and scattering the ashes there. Because I think neither one of us could put the date on there because that wasn't who she was. And we hadn't been given, she didn't tell us exactly what she wanted, but we both felt that was really what she wanted.
That's awesome.
I don't know if because I follow a rebel throughout my life, even sort of in a spiritual sense. I've never conformed, and even my neighbor would come up to me because people call it the RV death mobile, and I just kind of like, really? Like, is it? Like, am I gonna die in here kind of thing? But she'd come up, she goes, can I talk about my father for a minute? My mom died 3 months ago. He can't get rid of the clothes in the closet. He goes to the cemetery every day. What's going on? And I said this, does it make him feel good? She goes, I think it does. Who cares? Keep the clothes. Do what makes you feel right. Don't conform just because everyone else is doing it this way. And I think we need to pave somewhat our own path. And just by that example, I think your mom maybe paved her own path and has always lived her life a little differently. So it was perfect.
And even at the end where she was alone for quite a few years in the house by herself, and people would say, aren't you lonely? And she said, no, I just love this place. I have peace here. And, you know, I just want to be here as long as I can.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Well, thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate you inviting me to Ithaca. Thank you for holding the snow. I really appreciate that. When I landed in Syracuse, I was like, holy crap, you know, because there was still some snow on the ground. But y'all cleared it on the roads and all, even on the grass for me. So I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for taking the time.